Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for.
Kelly officially fired. That means it is time to talk coaching candidates, and it is time to talk about what I believe is one of the best jobs in college football. Okay, so let me say this. I think there is, to me, I would argue this to my death. I would argue that there are 3 jobs, in my opinion, that are better than every other job in college football. In other words, they have everything you need, starting with, and I still think this is the most important thing you can have, which is a natural recruiting base, and ideally a natural recruiting base where a lot of other people aren't recruiting, okay? Everyone's going to talk about the portal era, NIL. I get that. You still need a baseline of 20 to 25 high school players a year, and so I bring it up because guess what? LSU is second to none. We all know the stats. Louisiana produces more NFL players per capita than any state in America. And so when I look at all these jobs, resources, money, facilities, recruiting base, want to win, stadium atmosphere, fan base, I think in some order, it is LSU, Georgia, and Ohio State. Ohio State hasn't had a real coaching search in about 15 years. Georgia opened, and we knew it was going to Kirby Smart. So that shows you how rare it is that these jobs open. But now that LSU is open, I think basically everybody's in play. I mean, listen, every single coach in America isn't going to take that job. But I think, I've heard Josh Pate say this. I think he's 100% right. I think there are people that we wouldn't think are even interested in coaching college football that would sprint to be the LSU head football coach. And so let's go ahead and dive into some candidates. I got about 4 or 5 right off the top of my head. And I think the first one is the obvious one. It's the name that, listen, if you are a fan of any school, this is the number 1 candidate available. And I do believe that with the right contract, the right approach, the right this, the right that you can get him. I think it's Lane Kiffin. I mean, listen, Lane Kiffin, we've talked about so much with the Florida job. The bottom line with Lane Kiffin is this. I know everybody's doing this thing of, well, Lane Kiffin, he's never been happier and he's doing hot yoga and his daughter's on campus there. Okay, I get it. But guess what? This was a dude that 3 years ago was going to take the Auburn job, okay? And so if you were going to take the Auburn job, you mean to tell me you're never going to leave for another job? If you were to take the Auburn job, I'm sorry, but that makes you a candidate for Florida. It makes you a candidate if Alabama ever opens again. If Ohio, pick the best jobs in America. If Sark goes to the NFL and Texas opens, that makes you a candidate immediately. And so I don't want to hear all this, Lane Kiffin, he's never been I don't care. When LSU calls, you have to listen. You just have to listen. And so to me, he's the number 1 candidate. If you can get him, it's no doubt about it. It's blank check. Apparently, money is no issue. Again, producer Matt is off for the evening. But I would have him pull up that Matt Moscana tweet because Matt Moscana said that money is not an issue for LSU in this coaching search. And so to me, you look at it, you sit there and say, well, wait a second. If money is of no issue to LSU, then if they're going to pay $100 million in buyouts to Brian Kelly and his staff, you know what that means to me? That means that guess what? It means that all of a sudden money isn't an issue with hiring the next head football coach. And so if money is no issue, then Lane Kiffin has to be your number 1 call. Now, I think the issue with Lane Kiffin, and let me even backtrack, because I think the biggest issue with LSU that I'm going to be fascinated going forward, who is going to be making the hire? Because right now we found out today that Brian Kelly and Scott Woodward, the AD, blew up at each other, and that basically the governor of the state of Louisiana had to get involved, okay? And so I just bring it up because if Scott Woodward ultimately didn't make the firing, I'm going to call it something crazy. That probably means to me that Scott Woodward is not making the hiring of the next head coach as well. So I do think that matters. But again, ultimately, if you're willing to pay $100 million and it gets so crazy that the governor of your state is getting involved, guess what that means to me? That means to me that you are pretty comfortable in that you're pretty comfortable in basically spending whatever it takes to get the right head football coach. So if you're going to spend $100 million to buy out Brian Kelly and his staff, I'm sorry, but Lane Kiffin, whatever it costs, you're going to try and go after him. I'll be curious. There's all sorts of reports on Lane Kiffin. There was a report late last week that Florida has already offered him $13 million a year to be the head coach. We don't know if it's true. I think the other thing with Lane Kiffin that is super duper obvious with Kiffin is, he could be coaching into the college football playoff. We talked about it on the show this morning. We talked about the fact that with Lane Kiffin, you're probably at this point realistically going to be waiting until what? Almost Christmas time if he makes the college football playoff. The opening round of the college football playoff is the weekend before Christmas. December 20th is the Saturday, okay? Well, guess what? LSU season is going to end on November 28th. The regular season is anyway, and it's no different than Florida. It's no different than a lot of these places. What do you do? How do you handle it? What is the situation? What are you going to do? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you have to know that Lane Kiffin is going to say yes to your job if you're going to wait that long. And so for people who are not following, Ole Miss is right now 7-1 through 2/3 of their season, through 66% of their season. They still have South Carolina. They stink. The Citadel. They stink. Florida, interim head coach. They stink. And at Mississippi State. And so if Ole Miss goes 10-2, so all they have to do is go 3-1 in their final four, and they should with South Carolina, Citadel, and Florida at home and Mississippi State on the road. Guess what? They go 3-1. They're going to the college football playoff. They go 4-0. They might be going to Atlanta and getting a top 4 seed in the college football playoff. And so I just bring it up because if you're LSU, can you wait that long? I don't know. But to me, I think Lane Kiffin has to be the number one candidate. I'll tell you this, if I was doing a pecking order of jobs, I think LSU's got to be ahead of Florida. I really do. This is actually kind of a worst case scenario weekend for Florida. Florida, they don't play. Lane Kiffin beats Oklahoma, which means that they're 7-1. You were kind of hoping he was going to lose this game so that hopefully he would fall to 6-2, maybe miss the playoff. Now he's not missing the playoff. He's not whatever. And I think it's really bad. Remember, by the way, if you're an LSU fan, follow our Torres on LSU account. Let's get to a couple other names. Listen, I think the other, there's a bunch of names that make sense to me. So I will be quick. If Lane Kiffin says no, is there that home run candidate? Now, again, I think there might be people out there that we don't really think of as candidates that might be interested. By the way, no, I don't think Dan Lanning's leaving. No, I don't think Ryan Day's leaving, etc. But as far as everybody else is concerned, I'm trying to think of candidates off the top of my head. One, I saw Luke in the chat reference John Summerall. He's right down the road at Tulane. Fun story on John Summerall. John Summerall will be joining the Aaron Torres pod on Monday night. We actually interviewed John Summerall a few days ago. And John Summerall, basically, we talked mostly about the Tulane situation, but I did ask him, how do you handle being pursued by other schools? So John Summerall I talked to late last week. Luke referenced John Summerall. And I think, listen, I'll say this. Again, it's hard to know who is actually a legitimate candidate. This is Luke's comment. Seems like Summerall to LSU is a given. That's the best SEC opening by a mile. It's better than Florida, better than Auburn if it comes open. So a couple things. One, if you're not familiar with John Summerall, like the dude, like if you know the resume, whatever, you're going to want to stay plugged into the Aaron Torres pod on Monday because we're going to talk to him probably about 6 p.m. Eastern time. He's impossible not to like. And I'll just give you a little preview. Like he gave me big Dan Lanning vibes, like younger guy, defensive guy, confident in who he is, not afraid to be whatever. And oh, by the way, the guy wins, right? So John Summerall right now, Tulane is 6-1. They play UTSA on Thursday night. But keep in mind, they beat Northwestern earlier this year. Northwestern right now is 5-3. They're a good football team. Duke, they beat Duke. So they're a good team. Defensive culture, he's in that state. Now the big question becomes, is that somebody that basically, I guess for lack of a better term, is he quote unquote a big enough name? I'm not saying, I'm just saying I don't know if he's a big enough name. LSU a few years ago didn't think Lane Kiffin was a big enough name. Now, again, Scott Woodward was making the hire, so I feel like that was a little bit of a different situation. But I just bring it up to say that I don't know. I'll be very curious to see if that is somebody that LSU would potentially be interested in because, again, great coach. I just don't know if he's a big enough name in this era. Keeping it going, I see a lot of people referencing this name, and I think this is a totally fair name, James Franklin. Again, I don't think it's where LSU wants to go, but say what you want about James Franklin. He's been in the SEC and won at Vandy. Oh, by the way, never forget, he not only won at Vandy, but guess what else? He went to the Big Ten. He consistently had a top-tier program. I'd be curious, the one thing I'll say about James Franklin, after the Brian Kelly era where everybody hated the coach, I kind of do think like James Franklin would just bring some positive vibes to the room, right? Like you can criticize James Franklin for whatever. At least the guy is enjoyable. At least people like him. At least people enjoy being around him. And so maybe James Franklin does make sense. Now, there's positives and there's negatives, and everybody knows what the negatives are. The negatives are, is this a guy that is going to elevate you beyond good to great, beyond good to national championship? The reason Brian Kelly is not the head coach, besides the fact that he's a stubborn pain in the you-know-what, is because Brian Kelly, it's basically like nobody wanted to deal with him, and he wasn't going to be the guy that got them to the place that they wanted to go. And where they wanted to go was national championships. And so I only bring it up because, put simply, is that like, if Brian Kelly wasn't good enough, I don't know if James Franklin would be. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just saying out loud. But James Franklin is a guy that you absolutely have to call. And I think if you don't get Lane Kiffin, listen, I think you do a lot worse. And oh, by the way, here's a great thing with James Franklin. And I know LSU isn't trying to pinch pennies on the pinch pennies? Did I say pinch pennies? Pinch pennies on the next hire. By the way, I apologize. I'm just a total mess right now wearing my Tyson Chicken shirt as I'm talking LSU football right now. But I just bring it up because, is James Franklin a big enough name? A couple other names that come to mind. A couple people have mentioned in the chat, John Gruden wants to coach college football. I don't think John Gruden can be your first call. I don't think John Gruden can be your second call. I will say this, though, is that if we are living in a world where LSU is already open, Arkansas is already open, Florida is already open, Auburn, I'll be honest, if Auburn lost to Arkansas the other day, I think that job might be open. I think Kentucky is going to be open. I mean, that's 5 coaching jobs. John Gruden said he wants to coach in the SEC. And as we talked about a minute ago, there are not enough good jobs there are not enough good coaches for all of these jobs. And so I just John Gruden is going to get one of these jobs if he wants it. Maybe, I mean, he said he would die to coach in the SEC. I mean, I don't know. I'm not as anti-Gruden as everybody else. I understand people saying he's never coached in college football. Look at Belichick, whatever. I think Gruden's different. I think recruiting is all about connecting with people. There might not be a person on planet Earth that connects better with people than John Gruden. I mean, everybody loves him. Everybody watches his little videos on social media of the unboxings and the this and the that and whatever. I think he would be a dynamic recruiter. Now, I think with John Gruden, a couple things. One, and this is where LSU is kind of interesting. LSU already has the infrastructure in place. They have a great quote-unquote front office. They have great personnel people. And it's in a state that kind of recruits itself. Like, listen, if Brian Kelly, go back to, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, I think they signed 9 out of the top 10 players in the state of Louisiana, and people don't even like Brian Kelly. So it's like, you get John Gruden, the talent that dude could bring in is just absolutely insane to me. And so I think John Gruden is another name that has to be considered. You want a total wild card that I would call? And I don't think it's that crazy. By the way, again, Tito's, if you're watching, Tito's is helping me get through this college football season. They used to say America runs on Duncan. Torres, after about 6 p.m. Eastern, runs on, maybe not 6 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. America runs on Duncan. Torres runs on Tito. So Tito, give me a call, Uncle Tito down in Texas. By the way, if If Texas opens up, Tito's is actually in Austin, so that sponsorship might make too much sense. All right. The name that I don't personally think is too crazy. Again, the issue becomes who is making the hire. And I hate to keep going back to this, but I think it is just so important to note that these things all matter. Who is making the hire? But a guy that is well overdue for a head coaching job, who I think is overdue, and who, oh, by the way, would have the support of some of the most prominent LSU alums, most of them from the 2019 championship team. It's that Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, okay? So listen, we all know Joe Brady's resume. Joe Brady was I guess he was technically the passing game coordinator the year that LSU won the 2019 national championship. He is overdue for a head coaching job. Now, I have said for 2 years, I think that the Bills should fire Sean McDermott and hire Joe Brady. But I just bring it up because to me, that's a wild card that I think makes sense. He knows the school. He knows the administration. He is going to have support from people that matter in that broader community. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. You think they won't go to war for Joe Brady? I kind of think that they probably would. That's a name that I would call. And again, now he left because he wanted to get back to the NFL, because he wanted to be a pro coach. Well, guess what? There's not that much difference between pro and college. And I guess the question for me becomes pretty straightforward. Do you want to take an NFL job where you're not put in position to succeed? I keep going back to this. If you're one of these NFL head coaches, if you're a hot candidate, don't take a job where you don't have a quarterback, right? Like I was watching, I was flipping around. I'm not going to lie and say I was watching it. The Jets won today. Congratulations. Aaron Glenn was a hot candidate for years. Then he gets to the Jets. They have no quarterback. He's relying on Justin Fields. Justin Fields up until today wasn't good enough. And all of a sudden he's 1-7. And so if you're Joe Brady, are you going to stay in Buffalo forever? Because they're clearly not going to fire Sean McDermott if you can't get past the Chiefs. They're just not doing it. But then counter to that, how many NFL jobs are you going to want that are going to become available? Maybe the Titans with Cam Ward. I don't know. But what I do know is you go to LSU, you're going to have your handpick. You're going to be able to recruit any quarterback you want, any high school player you want, any receivers that you want. And then, oh, by the way, just go get some dude on, go get some $3 million defensive coordinator and let him run the defense. No different than what Lincoln Riley does with Dan Lynn, what Ryan Day does with Matt Patricia. Just go get a $3 million defensive coordinator. Who cares? LSU spent $100 million to buy out Brian Kelly. Who cares how much you're spending on a defensive coordinator? So to me, I think he's the total wild card. And I will give you the ultimate wild card that will say no. But I'd make the call. So Torres, sometimes this little noodle right here, there's some things that I think of that people make fun of me in the moment. So if you go back to SEC Media Days, in the moment, do you remember the big story out of day one of SEC Media Days? Greg McElroy. Yeah, I've heard that Nick Saban's getting the itch to coach again. And everybody was trying to pick, okay, would he take Florida? Would he take this job? Would he take that job? Would he come back for this? Would he come back for that? And I remember saying this. I said, I think there's one job that Nick Saban might actually be interested in, because Nick Saban's not coming back to a job where you have to rebuild. Nick Saban wants to walk into a place that's good enough to win. And Nick Saban, he's not coming back. But hypothetically, if he were going to, he's going to want to walk into a place. He left Alabama ready to win a national championship. Clearly, Kalen DeBoer might do it in year two, largely, and I don't want to disrespect what Kalen DeBoer's done, but with a lot of Nick Saban's players. So he's not going to some place that's a total rebuild and a train wreck, okay? But LSU, he's going to walk in. He'll have a top 5 roster in the SEC next year, top 3 roster in the SEC next year. By year 2, with the same touch, you could have a national championship contender. So I don't think Nick Saban's coming back to college football, but I said it in August. I said if there was one job that I actually think he would at least have to consider, it would be LSU because, like I said, I think it's one of the 2 or 3 best jobs in America.